This is Land of Havilah, 2 Samuel 19. The young priest Ahimaaz was unwilling to deliver the bad news, but the Cushite did. Absalom is dead, and David fell apart. Now David's victorious army is filing back into Mahanaim, and they're finding David in a state of mourning and wailing, inconsolable. Verse 1. Joab was told, "Behold, the king weeps and mourns for Absalom." The victory that day was turned into mourning among all the people, for the people heard it said that day, "The king grieves for his son." The people sneaked into the city that day as people who are ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. Comment: the army risked their lives, and some no doubt lost their lives, but now David's making them ashamed. Verse 4. The king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, "My son Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son." Joab came into the house to the king and said, "Today you have shamed the faces of all your servants, who today have saved your life, and the lives of your sons and of your daughters, and the lives of your wives, and the lives of your concubines, and that you love those who hate you, and hate those who love you. For you have declared today that princes and servants are nothing to you. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived, and all we had died today, then it would have pleased you well. Now therefore arise, go out, and speak to comfort your servants. For I swear by Yahweh, if you do not go out, not a man will stay with you this night. That will be worse to you than all the evil that has happened to you from your youth until now." Comment: if the people can't make David happy no matter what they do, there's no reason for them to be there. In fact, Joab swears by Yahweh, not a single man will stay the night if David doesn't cheer up. He predicts David will lose all his supporters, which will be worse than every bad thing that's ever happened to David put together. So David has no choice. He has to forget about Absalom. He has to cheer up and encourage his supporters. This is the situation that God the King is in when someone rebels against him. It breaks his heart, but for the sake of the faithful, God has to forget about his losses, if it's possible for God to forget. He has to cheer up for the sake of the faithful. Yahweh said in 1 Samuel 13:14 that David was a man after his own heart. So as usual here, David's displaying that heart. God loves the rebellious very, very deeply, but if the rebellious destroy themselves, God has to put it behind him for the sake of the faithful. Now coming up, David's going to lift up his supporters. Verse 8. Then the king arose and sat in the gate. They told to all the people, saying, "Behold, the king is sitting in the gate." All the people came before the king. Comment: David addressed the people in the gate. He lifted them up. There's no record of what he said or how they reacted, but we assume he expressed his appreciation and he was successful in cheering them up. The next sentence switches scenes to what's going on in the rest of Israel, still in verse 8. Now Israel had fled every man to his tent. All the people were at strife throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "The king delivered us out of the hand of our enemies, and he saved us out of the hand of the Philistines, and now he has fled out of the land from Absalom. Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now therefore, why don't you speak a word of bringing the king back?" Comment: everybody's saying that somebody should bring David back, but nobody's taking initiative to actually do it. There's no authority structure left in Israel to get anything done, so David's going to organize a return himself. Verse 11. King David sent to Zadok and to Abiathar the priests, saying, "Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, Why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, since the speech of all Israel has come to the king to return him to his house? You are my brothers, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then are you the last to bring back the king? Say to Amasa, Aren't you my bone and my flesh? God do so to me and more also, if you aren't captain of the army before me continually instead of Joab." Comment: David's power base is strongest in his home tribe of Judah, just as Saul's power base was strongest in his home tribe of Benjamin. So he's asking the two older faithful priests who stayed behind in Jerusalem to organize the elders of Judah for a homecoming. He also wants to fire Joab as the head of the army and replace him with Amasa, which is strange in the fact that Amasa was the head of Absalom's revolting army, and Amasa's just coming off that big loss. Joab and Amasa are both nephews of David. No doubt the switch is because David's had it with his nephew Joab. Joab killed Abner in cold blood decades ago, and now he's killed Absalom. He's an outstanding military leader and has been for decades, but he's out of control. And Joab's brother Abishai is the same in every respect. Joab's been such an outstanding leader for so long, it's difficult to see how David could demote him like this. The history of Joab's military success is incredible. And even just now, Joab gave David some advice that saved the kingdom when he told David to stop mourning and cheer the people up. But David's pulling the plug. Joab's out and Amasa in. The killing of Absalom was just too much. There's a lesson for us here. Maybe we think we've been faithful to God, even that we've done a lifetime of incredible things for God. Okay, fine, but how have we treated His Son? What did we do with the Lord Jesus Christ? That's what's going to make it or break it for us. The king isn't going to tolerate abuse of his son or disrespect. David's appeal to come home is making sense to the elders of Judah as we go to verse 14. He bowed the heart of all the men of Judah, even as one man, so that they sent to the king, saying, Return, you and all your servants. Comment, Judah says to David, Return and bring all your faithful exiles with you. Verse 15. So the king returned and came to the Jordan. Judah came to Gilgal to go to meet the king and bring the king over the Jordan. Comment, for the most part, it's the tribe of Judah welcoming David, which becomes important in a minute. But some Benjamites and other Israelites are coming to meet David as well as we go to verse 16. Shimei the son of Gera, the Benjamite, who was of Bahurim, hurried and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. Comment, Shimei is a Benjamite of the family of Saul who cursed and threw dirt at David when he was fleeing Jerusalem. He's got a lot of apologizing to do. He came out to meet David. Verse 17. There were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, and Ziba, the servant of Saul's house, and his 15 sons and his 20 servants with him. Comment, along with Shimei there are 1,000 Benjamites, including Ziba, the former servant of Saul, who was taking care of Mephibosheth's property. When David was going into exile, Ziba told David that Mephibosheth was staying back in Jerusalem because he wanted to be king, but that was just according to Ziba. When David heard it, he stripped Mephibosheth of his property and gave it to Ziba. So Ziba's come out to meet David also, still in verse 17. And they went through the Jordan in the presence of the king. A ferry boat went to bring over the king's household and to do what he thought good. Comment, the meaning of the Hebrew is unclear here. Either there was a ferry boat, or more likely, according to other translations, the greeters were ferrying people and goods by foot across the river. Now Shimei the dirt thrower is going to speak to David, still in verse 18. Shimei the son of Gera fell down before the king when he had come over the Jordan. He said to the king, Don't let my lord impute iniquity to me, or remember that which your servant did perversely the day that my lord the king went out of Jerusalem, that the king should take it to his heart. For your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come today as the first of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet my lord the king. Comment, Shimei's apologizing for cursing, slandering, and throwing dirt. Verse 21. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, answered, Shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed Yahweh's anointed? Comment, Abishai and Joab are the sons of Zeruiah. They both have a hot streak. Abishai wanted to take off Shimei's head at the time of the cursing, and he wants to do it now. He's pointing out the law of Moses, quote, You shall not blaspheme God nor curse a ruler of your people, Exodus 22:28, verse 22. David said, What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should be adversaries to me today? Shall any man be put to death today in Israel? For don't I know that I am king over Israel today? The king said to Shimei, You will not die. The king swore to him. Comment, David won't kill Shimei, but he won't forget about it either. When Solomon takes the throne, David's going to tell Solomon, quote, You shall bring Shimei's gray head down to Sheol with blood, 1 Kings 2:9. Solomon will get the job done. Mephibosheth's also in hot water, so he's come out to meet King David also and give his side of the story to defend himself against what Ziba said, verse 24. Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and he had neither groomed his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day he came home in peace. Comment, this makes us think Mephibosheth is sincere, and whatever he's about to say will be the truth. Verse 25. When he had come to Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, Why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth? Comment. This says Mephibosheth came to Jerusalem to meet the king. Other translations say Mephibosheth came from Jerusalem, which makes more sense. The Hebrew could be interpreted either way. Verse 26. He answered, My lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I will saddle me a donkey that I may ride on it and go with the king, because your servant is lame. Comment. There was a short window for anyone to get out of Jerusalem. Mephibosheth says he would have saddled a donkey and gone with the king into exile, but his servant Ziba somehow deceived him and prevented him. Verse 27. He has slandered your servant to my lord the king, but my lord the king is as an angel of God. Do therefore what is good in your eyes. Comment. Mephibosheth says Ziba's a liar. The part about Mephibosheth staying back in Jerusalem to be king himself is hogwash. Verse 28. For all my father's house were but dead men before my lord the king. Yet you set your servant among those who ate at your own table. What right therefore have I yet that I should cry any more to the king? Comment. Mephibosheth says ordinarily when a new king arises from a different family, he kills all the old king's relatives. But instead he tells David, You brought me to your table like a son. I'm indebted to you. Taking the throne from you was the farthest thing from my mind. So it's Mephibosheth's word against Ziba's word. Verse 29. The king said to him, Why do you speak any more of these matters? I say, you and Ziba divide the land. Mephibosheth said to the king, Yes, let him take all, because my lord the king has come in peace to his own house. Comment. We don't know how it actually turned out, whether they split the land according to David's ruling or whether Ziba kept it all according to Mephibosheth's statement. Mephibosheth was the picture of a Christian when David took him in, lame and unable to do anything for himself, as we are spiritually lame and helpless without Christ. Now he's the picture of the Christian who has abandoned everything for the sake of Christ. Verse 31. Barzillai the Gileadite came down from Rogelim, and he went over the Jordan with the king to conduct him over the Jordan. Now Barzillai was a very aged man, even 80 years old. He had provided the king with sustenance while he was staying at Mahanaim, for he was a very great man. Comment. He was great in the sense that he was rich and in the sense of having wisdom and insight. Verse 33. The king said to Barzillai, Come over with me, and I will sustain you with me in Jerusalem. Barzillai said to the king, How many are the days of the years of my life that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am 80 years old today. Can I discern between good and bad? Can your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear the voice of singing men and singing women any more? Why then should your servant be a burden to my lord the king? Your servant would but just go over the Jordan with the king. Why should the king repay me with such a reward? Please let your servant turn back again, that I may die in my own city by the grave of my father and my mother. But behold your servant Shimham. Let him go over with my lord the king, and do to him what shall seem good to you. Comment. We don't know who Chimham is, but probably he's Barzillai's son or grandson. Barzillai says, Reward him in my place. Verse 38. The king answered, Chimham shall go over with me, and I will do to him that which shall seem good to you. Whatever you request of me, that I will do for you. Comment. Barzillai told David to do for Chimham what seems good to David. David changed it. He said, I'm going to do for Chimham whatever you want, whatever you request of me. You name it. He's giving Barzillai a blank check. This is the blank check of which Christ spoke in John 14:13, quote, Whatever you will ask in my name, I will do it, end quote. There's no way the blank check of Christ applies to all requests at all times. It's only for those who are asking in the wisdom and maturity of Barzillai. Verse 39. All the people went over the Jordan, and the king went over. Then the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own place. So the king went over to Gilgal, and Chimham went over with him. All the people of Judah brought the king over, and also half the people of Israel. Comment. In other words, Judah is much better represented than the other tribes, which makes sense because David organized his return by appealing to Judah. Coming up, the rest of Israel is offended. They feel like they weren't invited to the party. Some of them are going to be offended at Judah and some at David. Verse 41. Behold, all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, Why have our brothers, the men of Judah, stolen you away and brought the king and his household over the Jordan, and all David's men with him? All the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, Because the king is a close relative to us. Why then are you angry about this matter? Have we eaten at all at the king's cost, or has he given us any gift? Comment: the men of Judah say they paid their own way. They're not doing this at David's expense. But that wasn't the source of the complaint. The men of Israel just feel offended and left out, like David has no regard for them. So how could he be a good king for them if he thinks that little of them? Verse 43. The men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, We have 10 parts in the king, and we have also more claim to David than you. Why then did you despise us, that our advice should not be first had in bringing back our king? The words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. Comment: the men of Israel are getting hot over a petty issue, and the men of Judah are making it worse by responding. There should have been a gentle response to calm things down. Proverbs 15:1, quote, A gentle answer turns away wrath. But instead of that, there's going to be another blow-up in the next chapter. This whole string of negative events started years before when David committed adultery with Bathsheba and murdered her husband Uriah. There's still a little more fallout to come. 2 Samuel 20 is next at landofhavilah.net, 2 Samuel 20.